Hi, my name is Deb from DG Reads, and I'm here today to do a really quick intro reading some Goodreads Choice Award nominees from my shelves. I kind of feel like I already did the intro for this particular video because if you saw my December TBR, I used my prompt ball TBR game to come up with books that were on my shelves that were also nominees for Goodreads Choice Award. And yes, I do know this is kind of late. By the time this vlog is up, I will already know who won the awards. You guys will already know who won the awards. But the idea of this was to try to get to some of the books potentially considered the best of the year that I have on my shelves that I haven't gotten to yet. So my TBR for that wound up being 8 books. No, I'm not going to get to all of them, I don't think, in the space of this particular vlog. One of them for sure, A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang. That one is going to be in a river themed vlog that I have going on this month. The other books, I would love to get to all of them. I don't know that that will happen, but we're going to try to get to as many as I possibly can because it would be really nice early in the month to know I already accomplished my prompt ball TBR for the month and won't have to worry about any punishments when it comes to pulling prompts next month. So I'm not going to run through the TBR with you because I'm not sure what order I'm going to go in, which books for sure I'm going to get to, and I kind of already did that in the space of my December TBR, which I will have linked for you. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started reading, and I'll be back once I know what book I'm starting with and have some initial thoughts. I'm here with Kylie's turkey toy to keep her from squeaking while I film real quick. She's not exactly thrilled with that. But I'm also here because I have started Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. And this one I've been enjoying. I got a skip the line copy, which means I have a very short period of time to listen to the audiobook. And I really enjoy this one on audio, I think more than the print. So I am going to make sure that I finish it before that 7-day loan expires. But what this one's about. We are on an airplane. Everyone's trying to get somewhere and the airplane gets delayed. It's a relatively minor mechanical issue, but as things are when it comes to anything related to a plane, things get delayed by quite a bit. 90 minutes later, the flight finally takes off. Everyone's nerves are at their limit, everyone's upset, and it just seems like it's a rough flight. And then there's a woman who gets up and starts talking to people, and no one can quite agree whether she's young or old or where she came from. She wasn't someone who stood out in any particular way until she starts going around and telling people that she expects them to die in a certain way at a certain age. And for some people, this is old age at the age of 100 or of a heart disease at the age of 90 something. But there are also some that are soon. A traffic accident that happens at a young age, a young boy that dies at a young age. And some people figure this is a trick. This is a party game. This is just an amusement from an old woman with dementia. Other people take it very seriously and worry about it and obsess about it. But after they got off the plane, everyone tries to just kind of laugh it off. Except people start dying this way that she predicted. And suddenly they have to start taking what she said a little bit more seriously. I'm just shy of the halfway point, and it's been a little bit slow in the setup of it because we went through a lot on the plane. There was a lot of time spent on that plane, and we're just now kind of getting to the point where the first person has actually died. And we're following in multiple people's head, including this woman and her history. We're getting some flashbacks about her and her past and maybe where this ability of hers, this supposed ability of hers, came from. We're seeing the after effects of how people are dealing with what they've been told, whether it was good, bad, or ugly, and I am really intrigued. I picked this up on audio as I was driving to Thanksgiving dinner and got home, and I wanted to just keep reading. So I feel like there was a lot of setup, but I think there's going to be some good payoff with it. So I'm going to keep going and let you know my final thoughts once I get there. If we can keep Kylie from squeaking in the background for just a little bit longer, she's very eager to play this morning. I have an update for you because I have just now finished Here One Moment. And overall, I liked this. I enjoyed the characters and the story and the way it was put together, but I will say it was slow. I felt like it was longer than it maybe needed to be to get to the points it was trying to get to. I think the way the different narratives of all the different characters in here flowed together and wound up connecting, I think was really well done. It is very much a character character-driven story and a very slow burn, kind of getting to more reveals along the way. As I think I had already mentioned, we are following this death lady. She's one of the main POVs in here, this woman who got up on the plane and made all these predictions. But we're also following the different lives that she touched along the way and the predictions that she made for their deaths and how that impacted their lives. And I think the way that that gets explored with different characters was really interesting, and I think the way it just flowed together worked really well for me. In the end, I think I'm giving it like a 3.5 or a 4, just because it didn't fully hook my interest entirely. But it is one that I would recommend picking up. I really like her writing. I really like the way she tells a story, and the audio for this was very helpful in kind of distinguishing between some of the points of view characters. I think was really well done. So this was a great book. I'm glad that I'm kicking off things on a high note. I think maybe I just went in with a little bit too high of an expectation for this one, since this was kind of the one that I was most eager to get to. So I'm hoping to find some even bigger wins as I continue my Goodreads reading. For my next Goodreads Choice Award nominee book, I wound up reading the entirety. I didn't do a midway thoughts because I didn't think my thoughts were going to change much from midway to the end. And that was Disney High by Ashley Spencer. And overall, I liked this one. I wasn't wowed by it. I don't know that this necessarily brought any new and really totally surprising information, but it was an entertaining multitasking read. And since I was doing it on audiobook, that worked out quite well. This is talking about the history of the Disney Channel from very early days, where it was kind of a lesser known almost channel when compared to something like Nickelodeon that was getting more attention. It talked about kind of the major series shows that were part of the Disney lineup over the years and how things have changed on the business side of things, how philosophy about how long to keep a show alive, how to cast shows, how things have changed over the years in terms of what's deemed appropriate or inappropriate, the way Disney got into music and promoting music along with their shows. And I'm definitely a slightly older demographic, I think, than this is probably more so aimed towards. I was very familiar with a lot of the shows they were talking about, but not all of them, especially kind of the latter end of the book, were shows that I was aware of, but not shows that I was ever actively watching. I definitely saw some of the earlier shows they talked about, and even more so maybe because I had a younger sibling and younger cousin, that I saw it more through them, watching with them, as opposed to watching things that I was the target demographic of. I did find the discussions to be very interesting. I think the discussions about how having child stars and whether or not they're getting any sort of instructions about how to handle that as their life and how that philosophy's changed over the years was really interesting. And overall, I had a good time with it. It wasn't one I felt the need to sit and binge and just keep listening and listening and listening, but over the space of a couple days, listening while I was getting some tasks done at work, it worked out quite well for that. I will say I almost wish I had a physical copy to maybe see how that was laid out, if there was any extra material tied to that. The audiobook does have a single narrator, and sometimes I found myself a little confused when it went into dialogue from someone being interviewed about the show, and that wasn't necessarily distinguished enough in the audio for me to know that we had changed who was talking as opposed to the narrator or the author of the book. But that didn't come up too often as something that was a big concern at all. Overall, I gave this one 4 stars. I haven't read a lot of the books in the nonfiction category, so I don't really know how to weight it against other books. I personally would think there are better nonfiction books in the category, but I still had a really good time with this one, and I am thankful to Macmillan Audio for giving me a copy of the audiobook. I'm now 50% of the way into James by Percival Everett, and I have mixed thoughts. I warned in my TBR video that I was nervous about this because it's historical and because historical hasn't been the most captivating of genres for me recently. James is a retelling of the Huckleberry Finn story, but from the perspective of Jim or James. And I certainly think this is a story that benefits from a retelling and looking at it with different eyes, and I think it's being really well done. I think the issue I'm having with it is that it is historical. It's slower. The pacing isn't necessarily the fastest, even though I think the pacing is well done for the story it wants to tell. I think it's just not quite the gripping read I'm in the mood for in the moment. I think it's extremely well written. I think the characters are extremely well done. I think the take on the character of James is really interesting. Because we are in James's head, we see a lot of things that a little white boy in this era of slavery would not have even thought to pick up. James is very well educated. He's self-educated himself. He's read a lot. He can write. He can tell his own story. And he can kind of play around with this boy and his assumptions about life and about slaves. And I think so much of it is really well done. I think it's a really well written book. It's just not one that I'm rushing through. So I am going to keep going with it. I do expect to have a good rating for it at the end. I think it's just going to take me a little bit longer to get through. I'm back with you because I have now finished James and I'm here with some final thoughts. Honestly, I don't have that many more, I don't think, than when last I spoke with you. And overall, my thoughts are it was a really good book. I think it's very well written. I liked the fact that there's kind of some subtle humor to it while delivering some really important historical context and information and discussions about being free, being enslaved, what that looks like for these characters. I think the historical nature of the story just wasn't grabbing me, and that's a me issue and a genre issue for me personally right now. But I think the writing is fantastic. I think this is absolutely an author I would be happy to pick up again in the future. I think the synopsis promised a humorous type of read, or at least it made reference to there being humor, and I would not go in with those expectations. I think the humor in here is very subtle. It's kind of between the lines a lot of the times. It's something the characters will sometimes be chuckling about, but I wouldn't go in expecting big humor because I think that's not really the vibe that I'm personally getting from the book in any case. So this wound up being a very strong 4-star for me, and one that I absolutely can understand why this made it into the voting process for historical fiction, and why I saw so many people around the bookternet talking about this book and singing its praises. I think if I had been in a little more of a historical mood, I think this probably would have been a 5-star. So it is a very, very high 4 for me, but I think it just didn't quite hit the mark with my current reading mood, and that's a me thing, like I said. So let's hope that my next book is a little bit more exactly what I need in the present moment. But I'm so glad that this whole prompt ball combined with Goodreads made me pick this book up, because I do have a great appreciation for it. I've made my way halfway into Baby X by Kira Peikoff for the Goodreads Choice Award. This was a nominee in the sci-fi category, and one that I had picked up from Aardvark and really wanted to get to. This is set in a not too distant future where any bit of DNA left behind can be turned into an egg or sperm and used in the creation of an embryo. And celebrity DNA in particular goes for very high prices, and people are in the market for having a celebrity baby, whether the celebrity knows it or not. As the book opens, we see Quinn, who is a pregnant woman, and she approaches a man who we find out is a celebrity and tells him that she thinks the baby she's carrying is his. From there, we go back in time and kind of learn who our characters are. Quinn is a surrogate. She is someone who helps families who can't have their own children have babies. And the man that she approached in that opening chapter is Trace, who is a famous singer. He is with Ember, who is someone that he hired to be kind of a security guard, but it's not so much a security guard for him as a security guard for his DNA. He's been the victim of people taking his DNA and then blackmailing him to not use it, basically, and he's had to pay huge amounts of money to this place called the Vault that specializes in doing this. Ember and Trace have entered into a relationship, and that winds up getting complicated by this whole potential baby situation, of course. And then we have the surrogate, and our surrogate seems like a really nice person. We get the sense very early on in the story, as we get into the flashbacks, that she was not a knowing participant in this scam or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of moving parts in this, and I'm really enjoying it. I flew through the first half of this. It wound up being on sale with the Audible sale, and I was at work work and I needed to start a new book. So I was excited to be able to pick it up just for a few dollars and get started on this. And before I knew it, I was already halfway through and needing to pick up a different book so I could wait and update the vlog. I'm really finding the whole idea and the concept of using DNA in this particular way to be very interesting. I'm really liking the characters in here. This promises a breathless thriller with an ending you won't see coming, and so far I'm not sure what direction it's going, so I believe that I'm going to be surprised by whatever winds up being at the end. I wouldn't say so far it's necessarily a breathless thriller, but it's very fast paced, it's keeping me hooked, and it's doing its job so far. So I will be back once I finished it and let you know my final thoughts. I finished up Baby X today at work and overall really enjoyed this one. It was a really easy binge listen and I appreciated the really interesting premise of this and this world and what could be done and how that had a lot of legal and just general life and morality and all of those things types of implications. I really like some of the twists and turns and the fact that they surprised me. I feel like if I had been paying a little bit better attention, some of them I really should have figured out on my own, but I enjoyed that it was a twisty journey. Do I think this is a book I'm going to remember the details of in a while? Probably not. That's okay because I had a really good time and that makes this a 4-star read. It was a really good one. It's one I would recommend picking up. So I do see why this made the Goodreads list for the year, but also why it kind of dropped out fairly early on as not being best of the best for sci-fi this year. So overall, a very good time. I have a couple of updates for you on Goodreads Choice Award related books. First off, in a not so positive update, I have made my way through the first couple of stories in A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enrique. And I'm not sure if it's the mood I'm in or if she's just maybe not the author for me, but I'm having a hard time engaging with these stories. I can see that they're technically really good. I can see that they're even really interesting kind of premises with the idea of kind of a very human person, as the blurb says, intermingled, intertwined with things that are out of this world, things like ghosts and goblins and those types of things. But I'm finding myself kind of feeling a little removed from the story, not entirely engaged by the character. The second story in here, which is the title story actually, is set in Los Angeles and having kind of some recognizable landmarks, and some of that really did help me get a little more engaged. Even the plot for that one, I was starting to get more sucked in, but then the story kind of would meander a little bit away from the central plot and go some different directions, and I would wind up losing my focus on it, and then it would come back and I'd get engaged again, but it would lose me again. So I think I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to keep going in this one right now. Maybe it's one I'll try again later, pick up where I left off since these are short stories, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and put it down. On a much more positive note, I've also started The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern, which is by Linda Cohen Loigman, and this is one that I was a little nervous about just because it's in the historical fiction category, but I had very solid recommendations from a friend that this was a fantastic book and that I would enjoy it, and thankfully I can now report at the halfway point I am really loving this book. The main character is Augusta, and she is 80 years old, and she's basically forced into retirement. She's been a pharmacist. That's been her whole life. And she kind of gets pushed out and she goes to an independent senior living home. And when she's there, she winds up running into her childhood sweetheart, basically. This is the boy who worked for her father. He was a delivery boy for her father as a pharmacist. And they had some sort of romance, some sort of history with each other. But he wound up married to someone else. She wound up staying single and going into her career. And from there, we start going back and forth in time and kind of seeing their story unfold in the past, seeing their story unfold in the present. And by present, I mean 1987, not present, but the more present, I guess. So the fact that this is set in the 1920s and the 1980s is what makes it a historical fiction read, but it's not really, I wouldn't say feeling super historical to me. It feels more contemporary in a past setting, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And it's not kind of your typical wartime setting historical fiction that I feel like happens a lot and is more so the historical that I've been burned out on a little bit. So anyway, anyway, whatever it is about this, the characters are really hooking me in, and I think that's what's important in this particular story. We've got this main character, Augusta, and her father was a pharmacist. Her mother passed away very early on. She had diabetes, and she passed away before the invention or discovery or use of insulin. And not long after she passed, insulin became a thing. And that's something that Augusta feels science kind of failed her family. Her aunt or great aunt, I'm not sure, is kind of a natural herbalist. She makes chicken soup that actually cures people. She has special ways of doing things to help people out. And this disturbs her father because he's a pharmacist. He's all about the science. But Augusta sees the way her aunt does things. So I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to play into Augusta going into being a pharmacist. And yeah, I'm just very interested in the story, very much enjoying these characters, and very excited to continue on in this one. I just got home from going out for the evening, had dinner out with my best friend and her mother, and we went to go see a musical performance at the local cultural arts centers and had a good time and split a bottle of wine between two of us. So I'm about ready for bed. But on the way to meet them, I did have to drive just a wee bit slower than normal because I finished up The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern on the way there, and I didn't want to get there without finishing because I did get fully invested in this book. Now, if you had told me what all of the kind of tropes are going on in here, I might have just said that's not a book for me. We've got second chance romance, we've got miscommunication, we've got historical. All of those things don't typically work for me, but something about it here really just did. And I think it's that this author really put a lot of heart into these characters. And then reading the author's note at the end, that makes a lot of sense because the people in the story in some ways were based on people in her life. And this is set a lot in the more present day at a senior facility. And she was going through having to go through the process of putting a family member at such a facility. And I think a lot of that ties into what gives this book so much depth and heart and why the characters really felt so real. And she talks about the research she did looking into the whole pharmacy concept from the 20s and the history of that and the history of the things she talks about in here. And I think all of that just really was well done. So this was a 5-star read for me, probably looking like my favorite from this vlog. I am just starting Faybound, so that will be the final book for this vlog. So I do have more that could potentially compete with this one because it is one that I am highly anticipating and hoping to love. But so far, this was a fantastic read. I have picked up Faybound by Sarah El-Arafi, and this is an author I've really enjoyed before, so this is one I've been highly anticipating, even though it has been on my shelf for quite a while, and for whatever reason I just never get to it. So now's the time. And I have very quickly today made it to the halfway point. I started it a little bit last night and then just have been sitting and crocheting and listening to the audiobook this morning, so it's been going well so far. In this one we're following two different sisters. One is Urine, and she is a warrior. Her whole personality is wrapped up in being a warrior, in being someone who's rising through the ranks and leading troops, and then something goes really, really wrong and she gets ousted, basically, and exiled. Her sister has studied to be a diviner, a very different path in life, and yet they still love each other. They're still sisters, they're still close. And so when Urine gets kicked out, Lettel follows. And this is basically following them in exile as they're getting into more trouble and learning about the wider world and the peoples in this wider world. And I'm really enjoying this. I really like this author's writing. I'm enjoying the two sisters and their very different perspectives on the world. I think the pace has been interesting. I think I'm slowly starting to understand a little bit more about the world. There's something in here about drums being a weapon and music, or the rhythm of that being a weapon, and I kind of wish I had gotten just a little bit more understanding of that, but I'm having a good time with this, so I'm eager to go ahead and continue. I would love to finish this off today. We'll see if that happens. I'm a little bit busy today, but I am really eager to see where this winds up taking the story, and I will check back in once I know. I have just finished up Feybound this morning and had a really good time with this one. Ended this vlog with 2 wins back to back. I really liked the idea of exploring these different groups, the Fae and the Elves, and the way our characters are going into this world that they don't know, and their eyes are being opened slowly throughout the book to things that they didn't understand or that were told to them wrong, and learning about this entirely different culture with its very different political system, and all of that really spoke to the world building driven reader in me, and that worked quite well for me. The romances in here I liked generally. We've got one that's a sapphic romance, one that's a male-female romance, and I liked the characters that our main characters wind up with. I do think that the fact that both romances were on a very similar trajectory, and the fact that we get to all of the smut scenes at the very end of the book, I would say the last 25% or so, and all at once for both characters, was a bit much for the non-smut reader in me, but it was fine. It just was a few chapters in a row, it felt like. But like I said, I overall had a really great time with this. It's a solid 4-star read for me, and I definitely will be picking up the sequel when that becomes available. So with that, I have come to the end of my December Goodreads nominees TBR. None of these wound up winners, which doesn't entirely shock me. I think in most categories I kind of had a solid idea who was going to come out on top, but all of these were books picked to be one of the best of the year, and I had a good time with the majority of them. And because I have finished the reading for my river vlog, which is already up at this point, and that included my 8th Prompt Ball Goodreads Choice Award book pick, that means I actually have succeeded at finishing Prompt Ball within the first third of the month or so, which feels like a big accomplishment because I'm not usually quite that focused on getting through those in the month. So, any case, let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Were there any Goodreads Award winners that you were surprised by? Were there any books you thought should have been on the nominee list that weren't? Let me know all the things. Have you read any of these books? Are any of them on your TBR? And if you've made it this far and you don't have anything to comment, give me an emoji that is an award, a trophy, or something. I really appreciate you spending time with me. If you could hit that like button below, I would surely appreciate that as well. And subscribe if you're interested in more of my book thoughts, more of my Prompt Ball reading, and more bookish content in general. But for now, I will leave you here and see you real soon in a new video.